Welcome once again to this edition of The Golden Rule. It's a program based on the Bible, and the Golden Rule explains what Jesus said, that it's better to treat others. You ought to treat other people the way you want them to treat you. That's basically the idea behind it. And so on this program we do a variety of things, and today I want to start out with a verse in the book of Zechariah, chapter 4, verse 10. And the verse says this: "Don't despise the day of small beginnings." You'll understand why I use that verse as I get into this message. But I want to start up front by telling you that Christian Fellowship Church is having prayer meetings every Wednesday night from 6:30 until 8 o'clock to pray for the nation. And our nation needs prayer, and you'll understand why we're doing this as I read this one particular article. But small beginnings. You know, people that we consider to be somebodies used to be nobodies in the estimation of the world. So that's just whoever. He's a nobody. But all of a sudden he became a somebody. Now that's the world's estimation. We don't see potential in people. But do you know that when God created you, when the blueprint was drawn for your life, before you were even conceived in your mother's womb? Psalm 136:19 says that God knew everything about you and He mapped out your whole life. All right, now think about this. If you told somebody to build a mansion, and you told two people, you gave one a blueprint, and you said to the other one, just do it, who's going to end up with the better product? Obviously, the one who follows a blueprint, especially if it's the blueprint that's given to him by the designer, the visionary himself. Well, if you don't know that God has a beautiful, beautiful plan, detailed plan for your life, if you don't know that, then you're going to muddle through life trying to make things happen, and you're going to get nothing but frustrated. But if you decide you're going to follow God's blueprint, new ball game. And so I was reading recently about a man named Jeremiah Lanphier. And in 1853, he said this. He said, "One day as I was walking along the streets," before I finish reading this, I'll just say he was a Christian, he loved the Lord, and he was anxious to see people come to the Lord. And so he would walk the streets of New York City, passing out tracts and looking for opportunities to pray for people, but he was kind of frustrated by the fact that he didn't seem to be making much of an impact. Back to the statement. One day as I was walking along the streets, the idea was suggested to my mind. The idea was suggested to my mind that an hour of prayer from 12 until 1 would be beneficial to businessmen who usually, in great numbers, take that hour for rest and refreshment. And so, on the basis of this idea that was suggested to his mind, now can anybody listening out there think who might have put that idea in his mind? Well, obviously, we believe that God puts ideas in people's minds. So anyway, he spent several weeks passing out leaflets and flyers and putting up posters around the city before he actually began the effort. But then, on September 23rd, 1874, he opened the church. He had a church building, and on the third floor is where he's going to have this prayer meeting. And so, 12 o'clock, he opened the meeting in prayer, and for the first half hour, he was the only one there. Nobody showed up. And he was getting a little bit discouraged, wondering if perhaps he had missed God, come up with some idea on his own. But at 12:30, a second man showed up, and by the 1 o'clock hour, 6 people had arrived to pray. And he told in the promotion, he says, you don't have to come for the whole hour. You come for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever fits your schedule. But just if you're interested in praying for our city, come whenever. So that was the first week. The second week, 20 people showed up. The third week, 40 people showed up, at which point one of the attendees suggested that they might do this on a daily basis. So now they're meeting every day for an hour, and the numbers are increasing to the point where in January of 1858, they needed a second room. So they went down to the second floor and had a group. So now there's 2 groups meeting, one on the 3rd floor, one on the 2nd floor. And then in February of 1858, they needed a 3rd room. Plus, the same thing was happening at 20 other locations throughout New York City. This is called the Fulton Street Revival. By mid-March, remember, they started in September. By mid-March, there was a 3,000-seat auditorium in the city that was packed full of people praying during the noon hour of the work week. Instead of eating lunch, they came to pray. And I can't help but believe that God put it on their hearts to attend this meeting just as surely as God put it on the heart of Jeremiah Lanphier to conduct the meetings. By the end of March, every church in New York City was open for prayer and packed to capacity. Reports said that there was up to 10,000 plus daily people praying in New York City. Do you suppose that could make a difference? Absolutely, it can make a difference. And you know, God knows the future. We don't, but God knows the future. And I can't help but believe that God called for this prayer thrust knowing the future, because 3 weeks later, after this thing first started, the stock market crashed, and it was a serious crash. So serious that people were exercising 2 options. Some took their lives, and some went to the prayer meetings. And that's what caused the numbers to swell so rapidly. The churches were jam-packed. One New England newspaper said that in some towns, there was not one adult that did not profess a faith in Jesus Christ. Now that is unusual, to say the least. Not one adult in an entire town. That's what happens when God gets a hold of people's hearts and when people start to pray. And I can imagine that there were probably some, for lack of a better word, curiosity seekers just kind of showed up at these meetings, and the format was basically pretty simple. They were very structured. At 12 o'clock, they had ding, a starting bell. They started with a prayer, and then they had opportunities for people to share their own prayer requests or their personal testimonies about what God had done in their lives, or they were even confessing sins. Now, do you suppose that if you're in a meeting with, say, 20, 30, 100, 200, 300, 400 people, and somebody starts spilling his guts about the scumball he's been, the life he's been living, the even terrible things that he's done, do you suppose that might have an impact on other people in that room who are experiencing the same thing but not afraid to confess it openly? Well, that's what happened. Not one unsaved person, one saved adult in the entire town. And this didn't stay in New York City. It ended up spreading. New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, Louisville, Indianapolis, St. Louis, New Orleans, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Mobile, Alabama, Nashville, Charleston, all over the place. Listen to this. One traveler from Omaha, Nebraska, reported that as he was traveling to New York City to experience this for himself, he found prayer meetings continuously for 2,000 miles. Now, this was in 1850, and the first automobile didn't show up on the roads until 1886. That means this guy was traveling by horseback from Omaha, Nebraska to New York City, and all along the way, he encountered prayer meetings. Oh, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, Europe, South Africa, India, and Australia. This movement even affected those nations. These prayer meetings were spontaneous. They were simultaneous. They were unorganized. They weren't coordinated as such by anybody but God Himself. You know, our nation needs this type of an event. We can't manufacture it. We can't make it happen, but we can certainly provide the environment for it to happen. And that's why we're starting. And Christian Fellowship Church, there's nothing special about our church. It's simply a location where this thing is going to start, but we can't help but believe it's going to spread. But anybody who feels the same, I don't want to use the word desperation, but in some cases, our nation is in desperate need. We've forsaken God in many ways, many areas, many portions of our society, and we need to get back to God. So if you'd like to come, anybody from any church or no church, you're welcome to come. Wednesday nights at 6:30, from 6:30 until 8 o'clock at Christian Fellowship Church. We're located just north of the Holiday Inn on Highland Drive. You know, this is also reminiscent of a similar event that took place in the country of Wales in 1904. Things were pretty bad in that country also. And God chose a man named Evan Roberts to lead this particular revival. But he started as a result of prayer that had taken place for several years before by just a couple of widow ladies, elderly nobodies. Here we go with that nobodies thing, as far as the world is concerned. But these people were desperate for their nation and their cities. And so they started to pray. And then God moved it on the heart of a 26-year-old man named Evan Roberts. And during the course of his ministry, it was a similar thing, but they would meet in the evenings. And if the meeting was to start at 7 o'clock, the churches were packed by 5. There were lines, long lines of people waiting to get into the church. And as this thing progressed, more and more people came, and the meetings, they would start at 7, but in reality, with the church full by 5 o'clock, people already began. They were singing and they were praying, and the meetings wouldn't end until 10 or 11 or 12 or 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Hundreds of people in packed churches worshiping God and seeking God, and the end result of that was so dramatic that bars closed. Stadiums, athletic stadiums, were filled to capacity. No, they were empty. They were empty because nobody was going to the games. In fact, the athletes weren't even going to games. They were getting saved and going to the church meetings. Theaters were closed. Courtrooms were empty because nobody was committing any more crimes. The jails were empty. In fact, it was so pervasive, they had coal mines was their major occupation, and they had mules that would go down into the coal mines and pull the ore back out. And they were used to hearing cussing from their masters. And all of a sudden, they were so confused because their masters weren't cursing anymore, and they didn't understand the directions. That's radical, when even the mules get affected by it. Well, that's what we're looking for. We're going to see it happen in Detroit Lakes. We're going to see it happen across the state of Minnesota. We're going to see it happen across the United States of America, because God wants to have a say in the country that He founded. He founded it for His purpose, that He might be glorified through the lives of the people therein. And a lot of people have gotten to the place they could care less about God. Well, He's not happy with that, and He's going to show up, and I suggest that you get ready. I'm done for today. I thank you for tuning in. Encourage you to invite some friends. If you're watching this early in the week, this program appears 42 times every week at 4-hour intervals. So you can watch it over and over. Spread the word. Help us spread the word. Show up and we'll see what God will do. God bless you. Thanks for tuning in.